Okay, I see quite a few people on, so I think we will get started. So welcome everyone. Thank you for tuning into our webinar. We are going to record this webinar so that it can be shared later. So if you know anyone that wasn't able to participate and would be interested in the recording, we'll make sure we get that to them. So I am Elizabeth Hornstein. I am the state coordinator for Peconic Estuary Partnership, and I'm going to let the rest of the PEP staff and then our other project partners for this webinar, Nature Conservancy and Anchor QEA, introduce themselves before we get going here. So Joyce, I'm going to turn it to you maybe if you want to start the introductions.
Hi, welcome everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I am the director of the Peconic Estuary Partnership. My name is Joyce. Thank you all for joining us today. And I'm going to start by introducing the PEP team who's on this call, Sarah Schaefer and Elizabeth Hornstein. We're going to be joined today by the Nature Conservancy, Allison Branco and Stephen Lloyd. And our consultants at Anchor QEA, Lena DeSantis and Beth Lamoureux. So welcome everybody. And I'm not sure, oh yeah, so that's it. Enjoy and thank you, Elizabeth.
Great, okay, thank you. And because there are a lot of participants, I'm probably not going to go through the entire list, so you guys can click through though and see who is on. Allison, Lena, I guess, was there anything you wanted to say before we get started?
Oh, thank you. Just thanks for the opportunity to be here.
All right, thank you. Yeah, and all of our the PEP staff, the TNZ staff, and Anchor QEA, we're all going to be available to answer questions following the presentation. So I am going to switch over. And can you guys all see my presentation now? Okay, great. So the plan is I am going to give an overview of the PEP Critical Lands Protection Strategy and Climate Action Plan project. And then I am going to walk through the new GIS story map tool that was created to showcase the results of this project and show you guys how to use that tool. So I think most of you are aware that in 2018 and 2019, we worked with Anchor QEA, the Nature Conservancy, and the Fine Arts and Sciences to identify climate change risks for the estuary and incorporate climate change into our management planning. And this project involved two primary tasks. The first was an update of the Critical Lands Protection Strategy to incorporate climate change and specifically sea level rise. And then the second part of the project involved a climate vulnerability assessment to identify risks and then an associated climate action plan. And this was a stakeholder-driven process. We had several meetings throughout 2018 and 2019 to get stakeholder input. And a final project report was produced in 2019, and that report is available on the PEP website. And it was also linked in the agenda that I provided for the meeting. And I want to note as well that the climate action plan strategies and goals that came out of this project, we did incorporate those into our new comprehensive conservation and management plan that we recently released this past October that is also available on our website. So the original PEP Critical Lands Protection Strategy was developed in 2004, and it prioritized land for preservation and conservation based on 4 criteria, including lands located within 1,000 feet of the shoreline, lands containing fresh or tidal wetland habitat, lands that were within an identified critical natural resource area, and lands that were within a nitrogen stress subwatershed. For the updated critical lands protection strategy criteria, the goal is to build off of those original criteria, but then also incorporate climate change into our land protection goals. So through the stakeholder process, stakeholders identified a number of climate change considerations. These included the protection of natural shorelines, as well as the protection of upland areas that would allow for the natural migration of our shoreline and wetland habitat, identifying areas that may be inundated in the future, given future sea level rise scenarios, and also considering rising groundwater levels and how that may impact groundwater water quality and also potentially cause additional flooding, as well as saltwater intrusion. And then finally, our stakeholders also thought that this time around, it was important to also assess developed and agricultural land in addition to undeveloped land, with the goal being to identify these vulnerable developed areas that we may want to target for protection and conservation or conversion back to these more natural habitats. So in the end, we ended up grouping our criteria into these 3 overarching classes. The first class was habitat and water quality protection. And this class contained a lot of the criteria that were in the original critical lands protection strategy. So the goal here being to continue to prioritize preserving lands that contain valuable shoreline and wetland habitat or other habitats that have been identified as critical natural resource areas. The second class of criteria, inundation areas, is where we looked at those areas that may be inundated in the future due to rising sea levels. And then in the third class of criteria, here we considered groundwater protection, both thinking about areas that should be protected to protect groundwater quality and reduce groundwater nutrient inputs into our estuary, and also areas that may need to be protected because groundwater levels may rise in the future and cause flooding issues. And I'm gonna get, when we get to the story map tool, I am gonna dive a little bit deeper into these criteria for these, each of these classes. But the goal with this project was really to not only look at current conditions, but we also wanted to look at future impacts. So we looked at how our estuary habitats and lands would change in the future. We used 3 different sea level rise projections. And we took these sea level rise projections from the New York State Community Risk and Resiliency Act, which are based on the 2014 climate update. And we decided to use these projections because they do include regional projections for the state, and they have been adopted at the state level. So we thought this would help ensure consistency with regulatory guidance. So the sea level rise projections are shown in that top table there. And you can see there's, the projections range from low scenarios to high scenarios for the different time periods. For the sea level rise scenarios we chose, for our short-term scenario, we decided to use the medium projection, so 6 inches for the 2020 decade. And we chose this one because tide gauge data at Montauk seems to be closely tracking this scenario. And then we actually, because we are in the 2020s decade, we used basically as our current scenario. For the medium and long-term sea level rise projections, we decided to go with the medium high projection, so 21 inches for the 2050s and 47 inches for 2100. And we did this to provide an upper bounds for sea level rise planning. And to actually visualize these sea level rise projections and the predicted changes in our coastal habitats, we use the sea level affecting marshes model, which was developed by Warren Pinnacle Consulting under a grant from NYSERDA. And the map here just shows an example output from that model. This is showing predicted inundation areas under that medium-term sea level rise scenario. And then the table on the right shows all of the data that was used for this mapping project, along with the sources for that data. And this table is taken directly from the final report, so you can go back and reference it there. But we used a GIS mapping tool for this project because this allowed us to overlay all of these data layers at once and look at them together. And then we could assess the number of criteria that each individual parcel met under current and future conditions. So we ranked undeveloped agricultural and developed parcels. Those were all ranked separately. And we scored each parcel based on the number of criteria they met under current conditions, as well as those future sea level rise projections. And so the more criteria a parcel met, the higher the score. So the max score for the undeveloped parcels is 27, and the max score for developed and agricultural is 22. And the final report recommended focusing on the parcels that had a rank of 9 or higher. And you can see in the top table here, the number of parcels that met that 9 or higher rank for each of the different parcel categories. So for undeveloped parcels, of the 10,215 parcels, there was 1,107 that ranked 9 or higher. But we'll also note that 750 of those parcels have already been protected, indicating that we're already doing a pretty good job with our land protection efforts. But the remaining 350 parcels that scored 9 or higher and haven't been protected yet should be the focus of our land protection efforts going forward. And then you'll also see that there are a number of agricultural and developed parcels that met that 9 or higher mark, which we may want to consider for land protection and conservation as well, and thinking about converting those back to an undeveloped or natural state. And so before I get into the story map tool and showing you the results of these rankings, I just want to touch a little bit on the second part of this project, which was the climate vulnerability assessment and action plan. So this project involved identifying climate vulnerabilities and risks for the estuary. And the infographic on the right shows you the risks that were identified throughout this process. And this infographic is actually taken from our new CCMP. And you can see the many overlapping impacts that all of these risks may have on estuary habitats and species. The second step was to rank the identified risks based on their predicted effect on the PEP's ability to meet our management goals moving forward. And then the final step was to develop this climate action plan to identify strategies and actions that can be taken to address the identified climate vulnerabilities. And it's important to note that this climate action plan is meant to be a living document, so it will be periodically updated as new information becomes available. And what I really want to draw your attention to is that in this action plan section of the report, there is also an entire section called Climate Adaptation Toolbox for Land Use and Municipal Planning. So if you haven't had a chance to check out the project report yet, I would encourage you to do so. And I would encourage you to specifically take note and look at this section. This section talks about different climate adaptation approaches that municipalities may wish to use. So these include land preservation, which can be addressed through the updated critical lands protection strategy. This may include accommodation, which would involve flood-proofing buildings or elevating buildings and roads or improving flood control structures. And then there's managed retreat, which would involve the removal or relocation of structures that are threatened by rising sea levels. And then protection, which is basically, trying to keep the water out by putting up potentially hardened structures like bulkheads and seawalls, or using maybe more softer solutions like living shorelines. The important thing to note here, though, with the protection approach is that you're only going to keep, it's only going to be designed to keep the water out within a specific range of sea level rise. So it may only last for so long. And depending on, what approach you use here, it could have some detrimental impacts to our natural systems. And then additionally, some specific climate adaptation tools are laid out and discussed that could be used by planners to adapt and increase resiliency to climate change. So these include, simple things like incorporating climate change into comprehensive plans, to a little bit more complex tools such as amending zoning regulations, thinking about increasing our wetland setback areas and buffer zones, maybe amending our codes on shoreline hardening structures, other types of subdivision or vegetative protection ordinances. And then other things include utilizing green infrastructure to improve our stormwater management, and then also considering things like buyout programs or transfer of development rights programs. So all of these tools are discussed in the report. So again, I encourage you to think about checking that out. And the great thing about the GIS story map tool that was created that I'm going to walk you through is that it can not only be used to help us prioritize lands that we want to protect and conserve, but it can also help us with climate change planning and help us evaluate which adaptation approaches or tools might be best suited for particular areas. And the tool allows us to look at the estuary as a whole and look at the big picture, but then also to zoom in on specific areas that are of interest. And so I am going to switch over now and show you that tool. So is that you guys can all see the tool on my screen now? Okay, great. So this tool is meant to showcase the results of this project in a user-friendly and attractive way. And so it starts out by giving some introductory information on the Peconic Estuary. It then gives some introductory information on the updated critical lands protection strategy. It walks through how sea level rise was considered. And then it goes into our new land protection goals and the 3 classes of criteria, and then finally the rankings. So since I already went through a lot of this introductory information in my presentation, I'm just gonna skip to the land protection goals and get more into those criteria that were used for the project. So for each of the criteria classes, there are maps where you can actually view and explore the data that were used for each of those criteria classes. And I'll show you how that works. So the first class was habitat and water quality protection. And so here we considered whether the land parcel currently contains or will contain fresh or tidal wetland, whether the parcel is within 1,000 feet of the shoreline, and whether it's located in an area that's identified as significant coastal fish and wildlife habitat by New York State. And so we can actually now look at this data on the map. And to use the map, you have to hit the Explore button in the bottom right corner. And this little pop-up box here just gives you instructions about how to interact with the map. So we hit Explore, and then when we're done looking at these instructions, we can press OK and get rid of that pop-out box. So we can view the different layers by clicking on the layer list, and then we can click the data layers on and off. So right now you're viewing the critical natural resource areas or significant coastal fish and wildlife habitat for the estuary. We can also take a look at the currently identified tidal and freshwater marsh habitat, and then also view projected tidal and freshwater marsh habitat under our medium and long-term sea level rise scenarios. And just to show you this data, an example of how our marsh habitat is projected to change, I'm just going to zoom in to orient here so we can view this a little bit better. So this is current marsh habitat under our short-term sea level rise scenario. Then we can click this on to view predicted marsh habitat under the medium sea level rise scenario, and then predicted marsh habitat under our long-term sea level rise scenario. And you can see how the marsh habitat is migrating further and further inland. So this data is really useful not only for identifying those lands that we need to protect to allow for marsh migration, but also to identify areas where we may want to consider things like additional wetland setbacks and buffer zones, areas where we may want to think about restricting hardened shoreline structures, which would prohibit the natural migration of our marsh habitat. So there's a number of different ways where we can use this data for both land protection and climate change planning. And so when you're done exploring the data, you just click Stop Exploring on the map, and then we can move on to the next criteria class. So the next class was the inundation areas. Here we looked at areas that were located within an identified present-day flood zone, as well as areas that are predicted to become inundated in the future, given future sea level rise projections. So again, we can explore this data in the map by hitting Explore, and we can click our layer list to view the different data. So we can look at areas currently in a FEMA flood zone. We can look at, and then we can look at predicted inundation under our 3 sea level rise scenarios. And again, just to show you this a little bit better, I'm just going to zoom in on on Oregon again. So this is inundation under the short-term or current sea level rise scenario. Then we have additional inundation areas under the medium-term sea level rise scenario. And then further inundation as we get to that long-term sea level rise scenario. So you can, see the potential impacts here. So this data, may help to identify vulnerable developed areas that may become inundated in the future, and where we may want to think about things like managed retreat and buyout programs and converting those developed areas back to undeveloped natural lands to help increase resiliency and protect our shorelines. So again, when we're done exploring this data, we just click Stop Exploring on the map. And we'll move on to the third class. So the third class was groundwater protection. So things that we considered here is the parcel located within a zone of groundwater travel time between 0 and 25 years. So fairly fast travel time. Is it located within an area where groundwater tables are predicted to rise, and where that could affect groundwater quality and cause flooding in the future? And then areas also located in special groundwater protection areas. So we can explore this data. So here, this is the areas that are currently located in special groundwater protection areas. We can look at the groundwater travel time data to see, which areas have those shorter groundwater travel times. We can look at the areas where the depth to groundwater is currently already 10 feet or less, and then areas in the future where the depth to groundwater may be 10 feet or less. And I'll just note here that we only have data for sea level rise for 34-inch sea level rise, which we considered the long-term sea level rise projection. So we don't have any predictive data for the medium-term sea level rise for this criteria. And so we can see, here again, that there are many areas in the estuary where there could be potential flooding in the future due to rising groundwater or other issues. All right, so now I'm going to move on to showing you the final rankings, and just take a minute to walk through exactly how these rankings worked. So as I mentioned before, the scores were assigned for undeveloped, developed, and agricultural parcels based on the number of criteria they met under both current and these future sea level rise scenarios. And I want to point out that you can actually download this ranking criteria data dictionary, which defines the fields that you will see in the ranking maps when I get there, and shows you exactly how this ranking worked. So if you wanted to go back and re-rank a parcel yourself, or if maybe data changes for a parcel and you want to re-rank it and see if it's now meeting that 9 or higher threshold mark, you can do that using this ranking dictionary. And this is just basically an Excel spreadsheet. So I'm going to walk through how the scoring works for undeveloped lands. So in this first column here, the parcel can be given points if it meets the criteria under the current sea level rise projections. The second column awards points if the parcel also meets the criteria under the medium-term sea level rise projection. And then the third column, points are awarded if the parcel meets criteria under the long-term sea level rise projection. So just taking this first category here, 1 point would be awarded if the parcel is currently within 1,000 feet of the shoreline. Another point would be awarded if the parcel will be within 1,000 feet of the shoreline for the medium-term sea level rise. And then a third point would be awarded if the parcel is within 1,000 feet of the shoreline for the long-term sea level rise projection. So a maximum of 3 points could be awarded for this category. And then I just went through that. So the second category then is the priority land aggregates. So these are aggregates that form, lands that form an aggregate of at least 10 acres. And then points are assigned in these A, B, and C categories based on whether those aggregates meet criteria from 1, 2, or all 3 classes. And again, points are assigned for current conditions and future sea level rise conditions. And just note here that for the medium-term sea level rise condition, there's only a maximum of 2 points, because if you remember, we don't have predictive data for the groundwater protection class for the medium-term sea level rise scenario. So the maximum score, the maximum number of criteria classes a parcel could meet here is 2. Category 3, the scoring works the same way as for category 2, with points assigned based on the number of criteria classes met, but here the parcel must be at least 10 acres in order to receive points. And then category 4 works the same way, but here the parcel receives points if it is adjacent to lands that are already protected. And so the points for each category and then each sea level rise scenario are additive. So the total points for that an undeveloped parcel could get is 27. And then the scoring for the developed or agricultural land works in a very similar manner, but we gave a little bit less weight to parcel size. So here, instead of prioritizing aggregates that are 10 acres, category 2 just awards points for parcels of any size based on whether they meet criteria for 1, 2, or 3 classes. And then for category 3, this is limited to parcels that are greater than 10 acres and meet at least 1 criterion, but no additional points are awarded for these large parcels that meet additional criteria. So the maximum score for developed and agricultural parcels is 22. So the final maps here show the rankings for the developed, the undeveloped, developed, and agricultural parcels. So again, we can click Explore to explore this mapping data. And we can click the layers on and off. So we can view the criteria rankings for our undeveloped parcels, developed parcels, and agricultural parcels. We can view these all together, or we can view them one at a time. And then additionally, we can also view parcels that have already been protected here. So click this on. Undeveloped parcels that have been protected are outlined in green, and I'll just zoom in a little to show you that. And then agricultural parcels that have been protected are outlined in orange. And then you can actually, so you can, zoom in to look at specific areas, and then you can actually click on each parcel and view all of the information for that parcel. So this is a developed parcel. You can view the tax map ID. Gives you the number of acres for that parcel. It tells you whether it's private or public ownership. and the land classification from Suffolk County. So this is low density residential. And then it gives you the ranking score. So this parcel scored a 19, so was considered a high priority developed parcel. And then it also gives you the scoring for each of those categories and sea level rise scenarios that we just went through. So you can see exactly how it got to that score of 19. And again, in that data criteria dictionary that I mentioned earlier that you can download, it defines all of these things that are laid out here in this pop-up box, so you can clearly understand what's being shown. So the last thing I want to mention is, so in addition to this story map, which I think walks through a nice story about how this project came about and how the rankings work, we do have another tab up here where you can just go directly to the map and then actually view all of the data together. So again, to interact, we can click on this layer list, and this map, all of the data for each of the criteria classes is here, as well as the ranking data and the protected parcel data. So if you wanted to view, everything together and at once, you can go to this tab in this map to view, any information that you want. And I just want to note that in addition to, making this tool, which we thought would be an easy way for a multitude of stakeholders to view the results of this project, we can provide the actual GIS data files that were used. So we've got those files for all of this data I just went over. We can provide that to anyone that is interested in that, so that you can import that into your own GIS systems and look at it with maybe other GIS data that you have. So I know we have already provided that data to some municipalities, but if we have not yet provided that data to you and you are interested in it, please just email us and let us know. So I think I covered everything that I wanted to cover about this project and how to use this tool, but I have left a lot of time here for questions for folks to ask about, any of the rankings, more details about how to use the tool, anything else you want me to go over. And again, we do have the PEP staff, Nature Conservancy, and Anchor QEA. So all our project partners are available to answer your questions. So if you want to ask a question, you can either unmute yourself, you can type a question into the chat. Yeah, anything you want to ask us.
Looks like Al Krupski has his hand raised.
Al, okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to compliment everyone who was involved in this on the amount of work that was done and the amount of outreach you did, and literally years worth of work. And this is a really comprehensive approach, and it just, when is this going to be official? When can we start to share it and use it as an official tool?
So this is, I should have mentioned that, Al, sorry. This is officially a public map that is available, and we can, I don't know if, Sarah, is the link posted on our website for this tool?
Yes, it
Okay.
should be on our website where we have all our other maps, but we can send you the direct link to where it is.
Thank you.
And I may have provided the link in the agenda. I'm not 100% sure, but we'll make sure that's provided for sure in the meeting notes and when we send that around and send around the recording. but yes, it is available. You can share it, it can be used.
Thank you. Outstanding effort. Thank you.
Thanks. And I feel like I saw a couple more people with their hand raised. If you guys want to chime in.
Yeah, it looked like Mark Lowry had his hand raised, and then Josh Halsey just raised his hand as well.
Okay.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you. I agree. This is pretty outstanding tool and presentation. So my question goes to how it can be further used, and specifically, have you had conversations with DEC's Division of Environmental Permits, and have they thought about how to incorporate this into permit review? One of the challenges we have is that the department's ability to regulate activities landward of the adjacent area of a tidal wetland, for instance, is extremely limited. But to the extent that we do have discretion within those adjacent areas, I can imagine we might condition a permit for a project in that adjacent area that is of high priority for protection differently than we might otherwise. And so it could be worth exploring that with permits.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Mark. Thank you. We have not had those specific conversations yet with the DEC permit folks, but perhaps that is a really good next step for us to take. And that, is something we do want to know, if there's other people we should specifically be meeting with and talking to about these results and this tool. So yeah, thank you. That's a really good point, and we will definitely do that.
Josh,
Okay.
did you want to say something?
Yeah, this is a great effort. I'm just really curious about some of the ground truthing for the protected versus unprotected parcels. Maybe that's something that we could talk about offline as well.
Yeah, so I think that data came from available Suffolk County data, but I don't know, Stephen or Beth or Lena, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. So the protected status data is based on the Suffolk County land use. So if it was categorized as a vacant or recreation open space parcel, that was in consideration for protected. And then that was, we looked at basically public ownership as well as land trust that is available in the ownership naming within the Suffolk County tax assessors database. So it's kind of our first cut at mapping out protected lands. So yeah, I think further conversation about how it can be further ground truth is a useful next step.
Thank you. I also wanted to mention there is a climate smart farming team that I could send the link to, because it has a lot of resources for farmers and municipalities that could share that information with some of the folks that have parcels within environmentally sensitive areas.
Okay, great. That sounds great, Josh. And yeah, maybe we can follow up offline about further about the protected parcels.
Yeah, and just to add on that, the agricultural parcels are treated a little bit differently. So those we got data on county and town purchase of development right parcels. So those are kind of a separate thing from what I was describing before, which is just the open spaced protected layer.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Al, did you have your hand up again?
Yes, to Mr. Lowry's comment. So really, if if you're going to get together, and I tried to do this a year ago, and the coronavirus was really too big a distraction to get where I wanted to get with the regulators. If you look at the different regulatory partners in this area, in this watershed, that between elected boards and natural resource boards, and of course the New York State DEC, and possibly the Army Corps of Engineers, you need to get them all in the same room, because if you're going to have a regulatory approach to managing structure on the shoreline, whether it's for coastal erosion or for infrastructure use or anything like that, you really need to have a comprehensive effort so that everyone's on the same page. Because for private property owners, you don't want to have a patchwork of regulations that make it impossible for them to do the right thing to protect their property at the same time protecting the resource. So everyone's got to be on the same page as far as rules and regulations, and it makes it easier for for the property owners to comply and to move forward.
Yeah, Al, that's a great point, and I think that's an important thing for next steps for us is how can we work further with everyone on some of this climate adaptation planning and figure out what are the best strategies and approaches. So really good point.
The accommodation section kind of was what that was all about, of how do you continue to use these areas and enjoy these areas, but kind of stay out of harm's way. So I think, but you need to have everyone in the same room. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Al. Are there, I guess, any other questions from the audience? Don't think I saw anyone else with their hand raised. Oh, now I see Catherine.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to comment that this is such a great tool, and I'm very pleased that we have someone from our planning department here as well. And I want to thank you all for your great work.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate you tuning in and hope it was very useful. Okay. Josh, do you have your hand up again?
I just took it down, sorry.
Okay, no problem, no problem.
Elizabeth, if I could ask the group a question here.
Yeah, sure.
I know that there are some individuals from planning departments on this call. I'd like to assess if anybody thinks that this is beneficial, if we could roll out this tool to maybe entire planning departments in the towns, or to targeted people that maybe the head planners could put together. If that's something that would be beneficial to really, and maybe include board members or other decision makers in the towns, that this might help, with sometimes what feels like an onslaught of decisions that need to be made quickly, or to have answers that people might not realize are out there with this tool. If that's something that would be beneficial, we would be willing to set that up. I don't know if anybody wants to chime in from the towns here, if that would be beneficial. I know that sometimes we get, one or two people from planning departments, and we really want it to be knowledge that is widely used as people are, redoing comp plans, working on a daily basis with all sorts of permits and day-to-day planning issues that come up.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll speak with my department head on this, but I'm definitely looking forward to utilizing this tool. Specifically, I'll be reaching out to get the GIS data for it. I'll speak with our engineering department to hopefully integrate it closely with what we're already using.
Hi, this is Heather from South Hold Planning Department. I think we'd be really interested also to, have something where we have a few planners, maybe our land preservation people and a couple others. I know a planning board member or two would be very interested.
Hey Joyce, it's Brian Frank in East Hampton. I'll echo that. I have a couple of my colleagues in this webinar now, and this is definitely a tool that we plan to share amongst the departments, and probably need a little bit more time to familiarize ourselves with it, but would welcome that type of workshop. It's definitely something that we want to share with our board members. Especially the appointed board members that make a lot of the on-the-ground decisions regarding these properties. Let them, give them the opportunity to self-educate so they're not always hearing it from us.
And I'm going to piggyback on what Brian Cunningham from our Riverhead Planning Department said. It would be really great. I would love to have this shared with our entire planning department. I think it would be very useful.
Thank you. That really helps us gauge, kind of next steps and how we can most efficiently make this a really useful tool. So we will reach out to you about and defer to you for whomever you would like to be included, who you think is beneficial to be included in this type of workshop.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. Are there any additional questions from participants or feedback on, how we could make the tool even more user-friendly, perhaps, or anything along those lines?
I do have one more question. So the ranking, is that going to be public, or is that something more for internal purposes?
No, those rankings are public. Yeah, they are shown, publicly on the map, like I was showing. We can view the rankings for undeveloped, developed, and the agricultural lands. Oh, here we go. So those all are available for anyone to kind of, take a look at. Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
I don't see any, Elizabeth.
Okay. So if there's no, other questions or comments, well, first I'll just, I don't know if there's anything else that the project team wanted to say before we move on to the next agenda item. Looks like no. Okay. So I am going to, the final thing that we kind of wanted to do, and we are running a bit ahead of schedule, but I'm sure that's okay with everyone. I'm gonna stop sharing here or try to figure out how to stop sharing. What am I doing? Sorry. Let's see if I can. So I'll go back to the agenda for a second. So the final thing we wanted to do was end with thinking about next steps for climate change in the Peconic Estuary, which we got into a little bit for some next steps we might want to take, but we actually have a survey question poll that I'm going to put up that we want to get your responses to, that we think will help us, you know, further think about next steps that we can take. So, all right, so there are going to be 4 questions. I'm going to put them up one at a time. All right, so hopefully everyone can see the first question up there. Which climate adaptation approaches are you currently most focused on in your municipality? And you can select multiple answers here. All right. Just giving everyone, looks like about half of you have voted so far. So I'll give you a little more time in case anyone else wants to vote. All right, I don't think I see any more answers flying in, so I'm gonna end this one. And then I believe I can share the results with you. Can you guys all see the results? So these were the results. You can see here, land preservation was very popular, and managed retreat was the least popular. Okay. So I'm gonna move on to the next question. So the next question, we just wanted to get your feedback on whether you anticipate using this tool for land preservation planning, climate adaptation planning, or both. Hopefully it will be useful for something. Okay, I think everyone who's voted is gonna vote. So I'm gonna end that one. And then you can see the results here. So it looks like a lot of people, you know, would use this for both land preservation and climate adaptation planning. So that's great. Okay. All right. And question number 3. So the third thing, what other tools or resources can PEP provide to help you achieve your climate adaptation goals? I know we talked a little bit about this. Okay, I think everyone who wanted to vote has probably voted. So I'm gonna end and we can share the results here. So educational resources seem to be very popular, but also, you know, several people voted for model codes and additional climate change webinars. So it looks like all of these things may be useful. So thank you. We will definitely think about that and take that into account for next steps. All right, and then the final question here. Which climate adaptation tools are you most interested in exploring? And again, here you can select all that apply, so keep that in mind. Okay, I'm gonna end this one and share the results. So here we had, you know, a pretty wide range mix of these results. And they don't know. Interesting, okay. So yeah, so we had a mix of things here. So very interesting. Thank you guys for providing your feedback. We're gonna try to use this and all of the feedback that you gave us to think about next steps, anticipate planning for some additional workshops and discussions with a number of groups. So we will definitely be in touch on that. And I think before we sign off, I think we wanted to give a little plug for our upcoming PEP conference, where we are going to have one session that is going to be focused on climate change, and we're going to be delving deeper into some of these questions about what we can do in the estuary to address climate change and these issues. So Joyce and Allison from TNC are working on that session. Allison is going to be our moderator. So I don't know, Joyce or Allison, do one of you guys want to say a little bit more about the plans for that session?
Sure, I can. So first, just to let everybody know, the date is April 15th, right? The climate session will be the 15th. There'll be some other things on surrounding days. And so the session is going to have some great speakers talking about things that they've done at various levels of government, have done or are working on related to climate change, which hopefully will kind of spark a really good discussion. It's going to be sort of panel format with really brief presentations and hopefully a lot of discussion about what people have done, a chance to ask people questions about, what was easy, what was hard, what would you do different, that sort of thing. And then hopefully some good discussion about what everybody in the audience wants to do going forward to work on climate change in the estuary. So it's going to be a great session. All of you who said you want more webinars or educational information or are interested in all those tools, please come and join that conversation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Allison. Yeah, we hope many of you guys will attend and continue to participate in these discussions. All right, so if there's nothing further from the group, I guess we can wrap up here a few minutes early. So thank you guys again for tuning in. And we will send around some notes, the presentation slides, the meeting recording, and then be in touch with some of you about setting up some additional discussions and workshops. So enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.